Hey there. We have a very, very special guest today on the podcast. One of my favorite mom accounts to follow, but also a fellow doula. Her name is Liz Eidelman. She's a New Jersey mother of two, content creator, and doula. On her personal page, you'll find her cracking all the mom jokes, commiserating with her community of over 40,000 followers, because there's humor in the chaos when raising littles. After two very different but equally challenging births, Liz felt called to help other women have satisfying birth experiences where they feel in control of their choices and equipped with knowledge. She believes every woman should have the benefit of true informed decision making and aims to improve birth outcomes one mama at a time, all while raising her daughters. She serves women in New Jersey and virtually through thesagesister.com. I'm your host, Hannah Gill, and this is Motherhood Flow. Hi, Liz. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
So if you could just go in a little bit about yourself and your background, what you currently do, and how you started doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Liz Eidelman. I'm a mom of two. I live in New Jersey, and my two birth experiences have brought me to the point where I am today, where I'm a DONA International certified birth doula and birth photographer. And I'm really just so stoked to tell my stories.
Awesome. So you have two children. Could you go into kind of your pregnancy and birth story with the first?
Yeah, so I always say that I became a doula because I'm 0 for 2 on super awesome positive birth experiences. And I really want to help other new moms or even seasoned moms have experiences that they can look back on with fondness. So my first pregnancy was in 2018, 2019. I had my daughter in March of 2019. She's 6 now. And I would say that was a pretty textbook pregnancy up until the point of being in my third trimester. I was a new mom. I didn't know what to expect. I was with an OB group that I think my dad recommended to me because he knows he played golf with one of the doctor's brothers. It was like I was not doing any research, which I find to be so common now for first time moms. We just kind of go with the flow, right? So I was going with the flow really, really hard. And around 28 weeks, I started feeling really uncomfortable, having lots of contractions, and I was nervous about that. So my OB group sent me to labor and delivery, and they told me I had an angry uterus. This was the diagnosis. It was very bizarre. They said that I have polyhydramnios, which basically means excess amniotic fluid, and that the distension of my abdomen with all the fluid was probably causing my uterus to over contract. It wasn't putting me into early labor. It wasn't doing anything to my cervix. It just was simply just angry. So they hydrated me with fluids and they sent me on my way, and they told me that I was going to have ultrasounds every week for pretty much the remainder of my pregnancy. And I listened to them, and that's what I did. So I had an ultrasound every week from 28 to 36 weeks to monitor my fluid levels and to check on the baby. And everything seemed fine from what they could deduce. They gave me a statistic. I hope I'm getting this right, but I'm pretty sure it's 60% of the time polyhydramnios doesn't really have any reason why it happens. We don't know. 30% of the time it's because of gestational diabetes, which I did not have. And then in rare occurrences, 10% of the time it's because of an issue with the baby. And spoiler alert, it was because of an issue with the baby. But I will get into that after we kind of go through my whole birth. So I wound up making it all the way to 39 and a half weeks. They told me that I might go early because of all the fluid, but I never did. So I thought I was in early labor. And again, just going with the flow, I ran to the hospital and I was only like 2 centimeters and my blood pressure was a little elevated. And so they said, "We're just going to keep you." And I said, "Okay, sounds good." So they kept me and started a totally unnecessary induction, which led to a pretty big cascade of interventions. And yeah, I was there well over 24 hours. They ripened my cervix. Then they started me on Pitocin. I had an epidural pretty early into the process. So I was very sedentary. They broke my waters. And when it was time to push at 10 centimeters, a doctor came in that was not from my practice. So I was in a big rotating group, and someone came in who I had never met before and just had to deal with it. Which in hindsight, I look back on and I'm like, that's a problem. And I wish that I knew better than to go with a practice that had such a revolving door of providers, because you really just never know who you're going to get and
Yeah.
what their bedside manner is. So this doctor ended up being horrible. It was a lot of coached pushing. I pushed for 3 hours, and which can be typical for a first time mom, right? We know that this is a possibility, but I was never given any option to change my position, try pushing on my side,
Right.
try a squat bar. I mean, at this point I had had my epidural for so long that you would think that I would be able to, push in different positions, but no one ever even told me that was an option. And I remember actually eating lots and lots of ice chips, and I threw up in labor, which I now know was likely transition. And I didn't know anything. I didn't know what was happening to me. So I was like, why am I throwing up? And this doctor was like, well, maybe you should lay off the ice chips.
Okay.
Right. Like, this is the bedside manner that we were dealing with. She gave me an episiotomy without my consent,
Oh
which
my gosh.
now I know is horrible. And my husband, even to this day, says that that was the worst part of the whole experience. She just said, I'm just going to make us a little more room, and snip, like, didn't tell me what she was doing. I had no idea until after the fact. So really just horrible, horrible providers. I did, however, we were at a big teaching hospital. So I did have a bunch of med students in the room. And again, in hindsight, I look back at this experience, and I think that I felt like a sideshow. Like, I felt like a circus freak. Everyone was, the lights are really bright. Everyone's watching. There's so many people there. But one med student that was holding my leg, her name was Jen. I'll never forget her. She was the only person that I really felt was like warm and compassionate. And I'll talk a little bit more about her, but she was one of the med students that was in the room with us. So finally, after the episiotomy, baby's head is still not coming. She's kind of like crowning, receding, which again, as a doula now, I know that a simple position change probably would have helped this baby's head along. But instead, my OB, or the OB that was there, the stranger, was like, I really think we should do a vacuum. And this was the only time, I would say, during my entire labor that I was given any kind of informed consent. I said, well, what is that? Is it risky for the baby? What do we do? And she told me what it was. And she told me that the NICU team would have to be present because of the vacuum. And I said, there's already so many people in here. Let's keep trying. Can you give me like 30 more minutes? So we push for 30 more minutes. Baby's head still hasn't come. At this point, I'm exhausted. No one has nourished me or taught me how to breathe, taught me how to move my body in a way that would facilitate a more easy pushing stage, right? So I'm exhausted. I'm burnt out. And I finally said, okay, that's fine. Fine. Let's do the vacuum. So we did the vacuum. And after 3 hours of pushing, episiotomy, vacuum extraction, my daughter was born. They placed her on my chest, and almost instantly, I noticed that she was regurgitating a lot of amniotic fluid. And I said to one of the many NICU nurses, at this point, there's so many people there, right? So I asked her, well, is she supposed to be doing this? It seems like she's like throwing up. I don't know. I've never seen a baby like throw up this much. And this NICU nurse put two and two together, and she said, you had polyhydramnios, didn't you? And I said, I did. Yeah. And she was like, did they ever say why? And I said, no, I don't know. And she was like, all right, we're going to have to take the baby to be looked at. So I'm like, okay. So they bring the baby over to the warmer. Baby's on the warmer. They weigh her. At this point, they invite my whole family inside the room. That was another mistake I made, was that I had like the whole crew was sitting out in the waiting room. I mean, Hannah, now I would never. You could not even pay me enough. But I had everyone out there waiting to come and see the baby. And so they all come and stand around the warmer and they're staring at the baby. And no one is holding the baby. She's not skin to skin with me. She's not with my husband. No one's holding her. She's laying there and she's very chill and she's looking around. But like, I, as a 20-something new mom, giving birth for the first time, I had no idea that I should have said, like, hey, shouldn't she be at least like on me while we're waiting for the NICU staff to do whatever they need to do? Didn't even ask, didn't even cross my mind. So finally they take her to the NICU to be looked at. For those of you who are listening to this, I'm doing air quotes, to be looked at. We're not told what they're going to do with our baby, right? So about an hour goes by, and then finally the nurse says, okay, we're going to go see your baby now. And she gets me in a wheelchair and she wheels me over to the NICU. And when she parks me there, she says to the NICU nurse, and I'll never forget this, they don't know. And I was like, they don't know what?
Right.
That's what I was like, what? What's wrong? Tell me what's wrong. And when I just think back on my whole birth experience, they don't know. Like, I could write a book about this experience and that would be the title.
Yeah.
Because there's so many things that we didn't know, that we should have known. There was the bedside manner. It was just honestly like a train wreck from start to finish. So she says they don't know. I'm like, they don't know what. And then the NICU nurses and doctors sit us down and they said, well, we did an x-ray on the baby. Again, nobody asked if they could do an x-ray on the baby, which is crazy. They did an x-ray on the baby. We tried to pass a tube down her esophagus and the tube came right back up. I said, what does that mean? And she said, there's a condition called esophageal atresia, where the baby's esophagus does not develop properly. It normally grows up from the stomach and down from your throat and it fuses together. And in a lot of babies, some babies, I believe the statistic is 1 in 4,500 live births, the esophagus will not meet in the middle. It will not connect. And so it will not be conjoined. So the baby has no way of swallowing your amniotic fluid in utero, which is why it accumulated inside you and which is why you had polyhydramnios. So I said, well, what do we do? And they said the baby needs surgery. And I was like, all right, when do we do that? And they were like now, like right now. She can't eat or drink or even swallow her own secretions. Like, we have to get her to a hospital with a higher level NICU. So they took her in an ambulette and my husband and his sister followed the ambulette. And then I stayed in the postpartum room and my mother stayed with me. So very sad. I was separated from my baby. And I just remember, they brought the breast pump in to get me to start pumping for her. And finally, a couple hours later, I took a shower and that was the first time I just let myself cry. And then, I checked myself out against medical advice. I signed the AMA papers around 7 a.m. the next morning.
I would have to.
Yeah. So Indy was born at 8:37 p.m. Her name is Indy. And we got her diagnosis finally by like midnight. It took a really long time. So at midnight, we got her diagnosis. I stayed for 7 hours. I got a little bit of sleep, I guess you could say. Like, I rested for a little while. I allowed them to do one more round of blood work, which they insisted on. And I said, as soon as the blood work comes back, I'm leaving. And that's what I did. I left. My mom took me to the NICU and I just marched up there. I didn't have a wheelchair or anything. I literally just stormed in there. I gave my name and they were like, do you want to sit down? Are you good? And I was like, nope, just take me to her room. So long story short, it involved a 3-week NICU stay, and she had her surgery on day 2 of life, and it was successful. We waited a full week for them to allow her esophagus to heal before attempting to feed her. And at that point, she still had what they call a leak in the esophagus. So there's like a little teeny tiny, these like micro holes from where they fuse the esophagus together. And so they were like, we have to wait another week. So we waited another week, and then finally we were able to feed her orally. And once she had oral feeds, she was doing great on them, and she was able to come home. So just to backtrack a little bit about two different things with this birth. Number one is that her type of esophageal atresia is called type C. It's the most common type. It involves a tracheoesophageal fistula. So what this means is that the esophagus grows up from the stomach and down from the throat. The portion that came down from the throat also attached to her trachea, which is her airway. So instead of attaching to the stomach, it attached to the airway. This is good because it leaves them more tissue to work with surgically. So they clip it off the trachea and then they fuse it to the esophagus. And she largely lives a normal life, but because her trachea was compromised, she's more prone to respiratory illness. She has a little more of a barky cough, and it takes her a long time to recover from respiratory things. In terms of her esophagus, however, the esophagus works really well. She needs a lot of water to push her food down because you and I have muscles that help to push our food down. They contract. And we have nerve endings that help to facilitate that. But when you're missing those nerve endings, the muscles can't contract in the same way. So she eats pretty much everything. She has very, very few restrictions. If anything, they're restrictions she's put upon herself because she's 6 and she likes to be picky. But long story short, she's doing amazing. She's in kindergarten and she's thriving. And then the other thing I'll say about this birth story to just close it off was I wanted to go back to the one med student, Jen, who really had a soft spot for this birth. I think at the time, she probably had never seen anything like it happen and was just as shaken as we were. So because we were at a teaching hospital, the hospital that Indy wound up being transferred to is linked to it. So she was a student at both hospitals. So on day 2 of life, Indy had her surgery and we're waiting in the waiting room, shaking in our boots. This was like, not knowing what's going to happen to your 6-pound baby who's currently under anesthesia for 4+ hours is terrifying. So when the surgeon came out, who was behind him with a huge smile on her face? It was Jen. And I was like, what are you doing here? And she was like, I had to be in this surgery. I had to follow this through. I had to see this baby come out on the other side. So she asked if she could switch around her class schedule to be a part of this surgery. So she watched.
That is so sweet.
Yeah, she watched. She was involved in Indy's surgery. She came to Indy's first birthday.
Oh.
Yeah, she was so special to us. And as someone who is now a doula who had literal 0 labor prep, birth support, nothing, Jen was like the closest thing that I had to any kind of birth support at all, if you even want to call it that. So super proud of her now. She's actually practicing family medicine now, which I think is a really cool gig because you get to do like well women's care, but also see through their whole family. Mm-hmm. And I think it's so interesting, right? That she, even though she was an OB student, she wanted to go into the general surgery, the pediatric surgery, to like see the surgery. So she always kind of has had this desire, I think, to like treat a whole family and to know a whole family. And so I think it's really interesting that that's what she's doing now, even though I know that her heart is in OB. If she listens to this, Jen, I am very proud of you for your role in family medicine. So yeah, that was my first birth. And I would say that it really kind of like paved the way for what I'm doing now, but also kind of primed some of my decisions in my second birth, although perhaps not enough. And I guess whenever you're ready for me to get into that, I can get into that.
I have a couple follow-up questions from the first one. My first is, when you got to the hospital and they said your BP was elevated, was that the first time it has ever been elevated throughout your pregnancy and everything?
No, I had a couple of visits. Probably my last 2 or 3 visits to the OB, they were slightly elevated. I even had done, I think I did, the 24-hour urine test,
Mm-hmm.
and it came back clean. I think most of it was white coat syndrome.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I also think my body was under a lot of stress from all the excess amniotic fluid. I didn't realize until I was pregnant a second time and did not have polyhydramnios, I didn't realize how uncomfortable I really felt.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense because I was wondering, I was like, you were 2 centimeters and you got there and your BP was high. I didn't know if it was just that once. And they were like, okay, this is a reason to keep you, or if it had been a kind of a pattern.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it was kind of their reasoning for keeping me. There was no real, I mean, they called it gestational hypertension, which ACOG does say is a valid indicator for induction, I
Mhm.
guess. But having done the 24-hour urine, knowing that it wasn't preeclampsia and that it was simply gestational hypertension, if I were with a midwifery group, I think that they probably would have sent me home.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because I feel like most hospitals are like, you're 2 centimeters, get out of here.
Get out of here. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, if you want to go into, I would like to know like when you decided to have a second, like how that came about. Cause I know everyone's story is completely different, especially after that type of birth experience,
Yeah.
kind of how you went into the second, and then you can go into your second pregnancy and birth.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we brought Indy home, I would say her first year of life was a little scary for us. We had to navigate from going from liquids to purees because you can't do baby led weaning with an esophageal atresia baby. They have to get used to puree consistency and show you that they can swallow it. So we went from liquids to purees and purees to solids, and it was very nerve wracking for me. It definitely put a lot of just strain on us overall, even though she was thriving. But we did still ultimately make the decision to give her a sibling that was going to be close in age. I am almost 6 years older than my brother. And then my other brother, the two of them are only like 2.5 years apart. So for me, having grown up always kind of being like a little bit of the outsider with my siblings, I said, let's just do it. We had taken Indy to the Esophageal Atresia and Airway Clinic at New York Presbyterian, Columbia, in the city. Since I'm from New Jersey, going into Manhattan a couple times a year was not a big deal for us. And this clinic really specializes in this anomaly. And so we spoke to them. We did genetic testing. We determined it wasn't, they say it's not a genetic thing. I might beg to differ on that, knowing what I know now. But they say it's not a genetic thing, and that out of the 500 families that they had in their clinic, only a handful, maybe 3 or 5 families would have more than one children with this condition. And those families usually have a syndrome attached to it, which Indy did not have.
Okay.
So that made us feel very confident. And we just decided to go for it. So when Indy was 2, we got pregnant for the second time with our youngest daughter, Stevie. And with this pregnancy, I almost have like so much more heartbreak and regret. Like this one was harder for me because there was so much how do I say this? Um, I was ignoring the like signs from within. I was just ignoring how like what I wanted, what I truly desired. And I don't know if that was maybe like a lack of trust of myself, a lack of trust that I know how to make decisions. And it makes sense because having been through everything that we had gone through with Indy, we were sidelined. We were slammed by this surprise diagnosis. So why in my second pregnancy would I expect myself to, all of a sudden trust this intuitive
Yeah.
process?
Yeah.
I'm not going to trust that because last time I had ultrasounds from 28 to 36 weeks every week, and everyone said everything was fine, and it
Right.
wasn't. Right. So I go into this pregnancy, I promise you, I pee on a stick. And the second I get positive pregnancy test, I didn't tell my husband right away because it was a little bit light. And I said, let me do it again tomorrow. But that night I was scrolling on my phone in bed. And one of the first things I looked up was midwives, doulas, out of hospital birth, natural birth. Like I started looking up all these things, specifically midwives, because I knew I had such a nightmarish experience with the OB group. And I felt like all OB groups were going to be like that. So of course, instead of finding a midwife from the jump, I switched OB practices. And I did that only because we were moving. So the first thing I did was go back to an OB to confirm the pregnancy. And within my first maybe 3 appointments, they recommended induction. For like, I was like, why? I don't get it. And they were like, well, you had gestational hypertension last time. You needed an episiotomy. Did I need an episiotomy, or did you give me an episiotomy? Right. So they said you needed an episiotomy. Second babies are normally bigger than the first. So we just think that it would be better to induce you earlier. And so I said, well, I'll think about that. I'll think about that. So I get to the 20-week mark and I hire a doula. And the doula I found was the second doula I had ever heard of. Like I didn't really even know much about doulas, but I knew a mom in town that was a doula. And I asked her if she would be my doula. And she said, well, surprise, I'm pregnant and I'm not going to be working for your due date. But here's a name of my mentor. I'm sure she'll be your doula. So I hired the doula and I kind of did it without really deciding if she was the right doula for me.
Right.
And being a doula now, I know that it's like finding a good therapist. You have to connect with the person. You have to understand them when they speak. You have to really want them there. And not to say I didn't love her. I did. I loved her a lot. But I would say her recommendations for me in the tail end of my pregnancy fell on deaf ears because we just didn't get to know each other the way we should have.
Yeah.
I also blame the pandemic for this because this was in the year 2021 and we were still very much giving birth with masks on. Doulas were allowed in the room, but we were doing all of our prenatal visits virtually. We were still kind of on the cusp in this really weird area. So I never met her in person until the day that she walked into my room.
Oh my gosh.
So I had a doula, again, air quotes, but did I really get to experience the full breadth of what a doula can do for you? No. So I signed on with her at 20 weeks. At 28 weeks, I switched to a midwifery group. Again, the same mistake is made. I don't interview these midwives. I just say, these are the midwives that deliver at the hospital that I want. Now, I tell my clients that there's such a huge value in traveling for the care you deserve. I don't care if they're an hour away. Get in your car and go. It's as simple as that. Either you want to have a birth experience that you can look back on with fondness, that's not going to traumatize you, that's going to make you happy when you think about it, or you're going to put convenience ahead of that. And you're going to say, well, I just have to be at this hospital. It's the one right by my house.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I did. There was one midwifery group that took my insurance that delivered at this hospital, and I decided to go with them. And now I would call them medwives. That's what they were. The care was a lot better for my last trimester. I was like, wow, I should have been doing this all along. They're so nice. They're so kind. They said this birth was going to heal me. Let's do it. Backtrack a little bit. At my 20-week anatomy scan for this baby, there was one thing. There always has to be one thing with me and my babies. And so this baby had a 2-vessel umbilical cord, otherwise known as a single umbilical artery. So for listeners who may not know exactly what that means, the umbilical cord typically has 3 vessels in it. And my daughters only had 2. A lot of times, though, that means nothing. It's just a variation of normal. It's a small anomaly. They will monitor the baby to make sure that there's no fetal growth restriction. But as long as there's no fetal growth restriction, it really means nothing. And that's what they did. They kept an eye on it. Baby looked great. Of course, I was very freaked out about this because I looked it up and it could be associated with birth defects, which I already had a baby that had a birth defect. So I was very nervous about this, but the midwives assured me that it was no big deal until the very end when I was reaching my due date. I was like 39 and a half weeks. And they were like, we should consider inducing you. We don't want you to go past your due date. And I said, well, why? And they said, because you have this umbilical cord, abnormality. And with that, we really don't want you to go past your due date. And I remember telling my doula this, and my doula at the time was very diplomatic about it. She was like, well, it really has to be your decision. If you feel like you want to do it, then you should. And I understand that rationale, and that's great. But if I were my own doula, I think I would have probably gone a little bit further and said, this is not a medically indicated reason for induction. But if you want to do it, I support you.
Right.
So I didn't get that first part. I didn't understand that first part. I'm like, well, even the midwives, if even midwives are telling me that I should induce, and these are the like, quote unquote, crunchy providers that I'm with now, then I guess I have to. So reluctantly, I walked in at 40 weeks and a day, not even remotely close to being in labor. Closed, high and closed. They started with a Foley balloon, and the Foley balloon never even fell out. They kind of had to yank it out. And then they started with Pitocin. I got my epidural very early this time along because I said, well, I had it last time and it was fine, so I'm going to get it this time. So I got an epidural. And at that point, I felt that my doula kind of checked out a little bit, to be honest. And, I love her so much. And if she ever listens to this, I love her. But this is a conversation that it needs to be had. Your doula needs to be able to support you through whatever twists and turns happen in your birth. But I think being a doula now, I also fully understand how once you get that epidural, it's there's so much less I can do for you at this point in time. You're only 3 centimeters. You're already sedentary. I don't really know, right? So she said, call me in the morning. So I called her in the morning, and then she came over. I said, I'm 5 centimeters now, so come on over. So she came on over, and, she was repositioning me. She was giving a lot of fantastic, beautiful emotional support. They had broken my water overnight, just as part of the induction process. Again, these are things I didn't consult with my doula about. I did not text her. They just came in and said, we're going to break your water now. And I said, sounds great. So it was kind of the mentality of well, I hired the midwife and I hired the doula, so I'm done. My work here is done. I did not need to do any further research. I did not need to know any further options because I was in good hands. And I know now, oh my goodness, that is so far from the truth. So far from the truth.
Yeah.
So, doula comes, they're flipping me like a rotisserie chicken, and a couple hours pass and I'm still 5 centimeters. And now at this point, I'm spiking a fever and baby's heart rate is kind of all over the place. Shift change had happened. I had a midwife that I really liked for 20 hours. Shift change happened, and it was the one midwife at the practice that I didn't like. And she came in and within 45 minutes of her shift change brought an OB in with her. And I said, I know what is going to be suggested right now. My teeth are chattering from this fever and probably from the epidural. I'm uncomfortable. Again, I'm cooked. I'm tired. This is the second time that I'm cooked from this labor. And they were like, we think we should do a C-section. And I was like, wheel me back. Let's go. And that's what happened. So I went back for my non-emergency sort of consented C-section that I thought I needed and that I thought was best for me. And now I look back and I realize that so many things could have been different to the point where it would not have led up to being necessary or even being on the table, right? So I had my C-section. My doula's voice in my ear for this C-section was like heaven. It was the only thing that kept me. I had my husband holding my hand, rubbing my head. Thank God for that. Thank God for his support. But also just when I listen back, I have a birth video that she took. I listen back and I hear her saying, "Here comes baby, here comes baby." And it's like the only thing that I look back on with fondness from this experience was like, thank God, at least we advocated to get her in the OR and she was there by my side for this whole shit show. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that.
Yeah,
Bleep
you're
it out.
fine.
So yeah, I had a secondary C-section, like a non-primary C-section after having a vaginal birth the first time. Baby came out healthy, beautiful. Umbilical cord was not an issue. Totally did not need to be induced. That first OB was right. She was a full pound heavier than my first daughter. But I do know that I could have birthed her with, less intervention and more support. So that's my second birth story. And I would say that my C-section recovery was so much harder. If you remember, I walked straight into the NICU on 2 feet, guns blazing with my daughter. And with my second daughter, I was like, I can't laugh, I can't cough, I can't stand up, I can't sit down. And then I wound up back in the hospital because I had postpartum preeclampsia.
Oh,
Second
gosh.
time. Yeah. So I had a full week where I only had my baby during visiting hours. Second time that I felt like I did not get appropriate bonding with my baby. And I just said, after that whole debacle was over, once my daughter was like maybe 6 months old and I was out of that initial postpartum like haze, I was like, this is a problem for so many women. Like I hear this same birth story over and over and over, and I see how it's affected me. I see the postpartum anxiety and rage that I have this second time around from the cumulative buildup of just being kicked time and time again while I'm down by birth. And I was like, this cannot happen. So I just dove in full force to learning about birth. I reached out to my doula friend and my doula, and I said, how do I get started? What do I do? Let's go. Let's go. And so I trained in 2023 when my daughter was like 2, I guess. And I got fully certified in 2024. And now in 2025, I have a thriving newer practice. I'm rounding up on my first 10 births. I've done 9, so I'm waiting on one more baby. I'm booked through the summer, waiting for fall mamas to hit my inbox. And yeah, it's been amazing. I find that I specialize. I consider myself to specialize in low intervention, even natural birth. I'm going to start teaching an out of hospital birth center and home birth course at a local wellness studio. And it's funny because I had epidurals both times. I had an episiotomy, a vacuum, a C-section. I had the most medicalized birth experiences that you could ever imagine. And I would say that a vast majority of my clients up to this point have gone epidural free without heading to the operating room. A lot of them have been in birth centers or in hospitals with midwives. I encourage my clients to get with midwives right away, as soon as you can, within your pregnancy. And so far, it has just been amazing watching these moms thrive. And I just feel so much happier knowing that I'm making at least a little bit of a difference for someone else.
I love that. And I love the point that you brought up about how you felt like because you were with midwives and because you had a doula that like your work was done. This is something I bring up to all of my students and clients as well, is like doulas are an asset. Doulas are shown to improve birth outcomes, but really everything comes down to you. Right. And your preparation, your education, your autonomy, your decisions. And the doulas and midwives are there to just like amplify you.
Yeah.
So that's one note I like to mention too, is like, just because you have a doula or you're with midwives doesn't mean like you're off the table, and like your decisions are important because they are, and it all comes down to you, and they're just supporting everything you decide to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have clients now that ask me so many questions. And a lot of times they're like, sorry if this is a stupid question. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Like, you don't understand. Like, no question is stupid. You need to be asking these questions. As someone who didn't ask the questions times two, like, please ask me anything, bother me at all hours of the day. I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way I feel. And, I know that being a doula can potentially have a high burnout rate just from constantly having to um, carry people through these pregnancies. But I believe that when you feel so passionately about carrying them through in that way, you're not going to burn out.
Yeah.
You're not going to burn out. It's the most incredible thing I've done in my life. And I've done a lot of pretty cool things. I was a theater major. I performed on stage all over the whole country. I've had large audiences, and watching a baby come into the world and watching a mother be born is like, wow.
It's a different level.
It's a different level. It's
Yeah.
a different level. Yeah.
So do you feel like your C-section was necessary? Do you feel like everything up to that point, like I know you said things could have been done differently to potentially prevent that, but do you feel like at that point it was necessary to do?
No, I don't think it was an emergency. I think a lot of times you can spike a temp from an epidural and having an epidural in for a really long time. So there's really no confirmation that I had an infection, but I do understand the urgency that they had when I did spike a temperature. I will say my doula did a fantastic job of freezing the room and saying, can we have 10, 15 minutes to talk this over and make a decision? And she did inform me, like, we can wait. We can wait. We can try a couple different positions. We can wait. It just was too little too late at that point. I had started my induction more than 24 hours prior to that, and she had only been there for the last 4.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like, if I had had her there when I opted for an epidural at 3 centimeters or 2 centimeters, she might have been able to say, we should wait a little longer before you do that. Another thing too that I forgot to mention is that my daughter was asynclitic. And for those of you listening, asyncliticism is basically when your baby is head down, but their head is kind of cocked to the side, like a tiny bit. And so it makes for a slightly more challenging delivery because they have a hard time navigating their head into the pelvis when it's not perfectly aligned. And a lot of times what will happen is if you're in an induction and they break your water bag is the only cushion that your baby has. It's the only way that they can move around smoothly inside your pelvis. Once you break that, now they're trying to navigate an asynclitic head against your bony pelvis with no cushion in between them. So I think what happened was they broke my water, my baby dropped, she dropped in a bad position, and my body was stressed out. I don't think it was an emergency in that very moment, but I don't see how it would have gone any other way based on everything that led up to it. I think it was a totally unnecessary C-section because they induced me. I think it was a totally unnecessary C-section.
Yeah. My son, my first, was also asynclitic. After they broke my water, got stuck, pushed for 4 hours, C-section. So yeah, once that water breaks and that cushion's gone, it's just so much harder. Not impossible, but much harder to reposition baby without that cushion. So yeah, it's like it was an unnecessary C-section caused by the cascade of interventions, essentially.
Right. And then they tell you it was a failure to progress. And it's like, no, it was a failure on everyone's part to trust my birthing body and to trust that my baby was going to come when my baby was ready to come. And if I'm ever blessed with a third child, I promise you, I will be so far away from all of the places and all of the things that caused these births to happen. And it's crazy because like I feel so healed from Indy's birth. Indy's diagnosis for a lot of moms with esophageal atresia babies, they can't get past it. And every subsequent baby they have, if they even decide to have more, is riddled with anxiety and riddled with fear. And I just have found this way to kind of tap into my own intuition. I've grown as a mom and as a person, and I've grown to be able to trust that. And I think too, like the more informed you are, the more you've read the textbooks and the literature and the evidence on birth, the more you can trust your intuition because you know the truth. When you don't know the truth and when you don't know anything, how can you trust what's going on inside you? So I think like the biggest advice that I would give to new moms is just educate yourself. Like dive in, listen to every podcast, listen to birth stories, make connections of why things happen the way that they do. Ask questions, say no.
Mhm.
Do things your way. And that doesn't mean to ignore, medical advice. That just means that your own intuition and your own knowing, you're the one birthing that baby, carrying that baby, building that baby's life. It's worth so much more than a lot of times where we prioritize that in birth. Yeah.
And I feel like we hear it all the time. We were both in the same situation with our first, where it's just like you go with the flow. You don't know anything. This is your first time being pregnant and having a baby, and you're just gonna like listen to your provider or whatever. And I feel like as first-time moms, if we can get more first-time moms to fully get educated and thoroughly look at their options, then hopefully this could get better for first-time moms, because that first birth doesn't have to be like a trial. Like, we'll just see what happens. It can be really intentional from an educated standpoint.
I agree with you. I feel like a lot of my clients have been second-time moms that say, well, I'm not going to do that again.
Yeah.
And I respect that and I appreciate that and I love that, because they're the ones that come into their births with this like tenacity and just this ferocious will to do things differently. Yeah. And I find that a lot of my first-time mamas, they've hired me for a reason. They take my suggestions. They want this to be good. But again, I don't think oftentimes that they understand the gravity of the situation.
Right.
They don't understand how important it is to stay home as long as possible and to trust your body and to let your body do the work for you. It's designed for that. Birth is 90% mental. It's a brain workout. It's a workout for your brain. That's what it is. Pregnancy and birth.
Yeah. It really is.
Train your brain. Train your brain.
So where can people find you online, either to work with you as a doula or just you're a content creator too? So what are all your links and handles and all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my doula page is The Sage Sister. My daughter's middle name is Sage, but it's _Sage_sister. And actually it might be _Sage_sister. I don't remember. I'm going to have to look that up and you can put it in the show notes.
Yeah, I'll put it in the show notes. Yeah.
But it's The Sage Sister on Instagram. I do doula work. I do birth photography, and then my content creation portion and where you can find me just kind of doing everyday life is my name, Liz Eidelman. And you'll also find my doula page linked in the bio of Liz Eidelman as well. So it's LIZEIDELMAN on Instagram. My website is thesagesister.com. I work in New Jersey, primarily in Morris County. So give me a call if you're pregnant.
Well, thank you so much, Liz. I really appreciate you being here and sharing your stories. I'm sure any part of your story would be very, very beneficial for my listeners to hear. So
awesome. I'm so glad. I hope it helps someone really come into their own power. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
You just finished another episode of Motherhood Flow. For more, head over to thehannahgill.com or on Instagram @thehannahgill. As a reminder, this podcast is provided to you for educational and entertainment purposes only. It should not be considered a substitute for medical advice. Until next time, keep flowing.